Good morning, church. Good to see you today, and thanks for coming onto YouTube and watching. Um, yeah, it's COVID-19. It's happening. The world is going through some really tough stuff. I feel like Australia's actually sort of headed in a really good direction. Our lockdowns are starting to be lightened, so to speak, or our restrictions. They're not full lockdowns in Australia, were they? But the restrictions have been eased, and we're sort of on this precipice where we're looking towards what normality might look like, and we're sort of at a position where we're sort of saying we're a couple of weeks away from what normal life could be like. I think there are going to be a few things that are going to be around long term. A lot of social distancing, hygiene is going to be important until it's going to be important regardless, but until we've got a vaccine. We may not be doing international travel for quite some time, but for the most part, kids are going to go back to school pretty soon. People are going to start going back to work pretty soon, and life will start to ease back into it. Already this last weekend, we've been able to catch up one family at a time with friends, and I know our family has caught up with a couple of families at separate times, and that's been actually really a real godsend. Mental health has been a really key factor, hasn't it, for the government to try to balance everything up. So balancing the mental health along with the physical health of our community. And not an easy thing for the government to try to work out. But I do feel like in Australia, we've been travelling pretty well. There are other countries that are travelling well, like New Zealand, Taiwan, and places like that. And then there are some other parts of Europe and North America that are being really smashed and still are being hit really hard. And so it's good for us to pray for those nations. But I guess I was, because we're sort of at this point where we're able to look towards the horizon and sort of say normal life may be around the corner, I think it's a really important idea to stop and to reflect and to sort of say, okay, so what have we learnt from this? What has the church learnt from this? How have people and the church done COVID-19 differently? So, as you know, basically the government said, all right, no groups bigger than 10. And so most church services had to stop, but small groups were able to continue. That lasted roughly 7 days, and from that point onwards, the government then said, all right, actually, stay at home. Stay at home orders. If you don't have to leave the house, we don't want you to leave the house. Yes, you can go to the shops, you can go to see a doctor, you can do some exercise. So there were these, things that you're allowed to do, these exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, stay at home. And so all of a sudden the church had to try to work out what it meant to be the church when we weren't actually meeting on a Sunday. And for churches around today, as long as we can physically remember, and then quite a bit before that, that's all we've ever known, is the Sunday worship service. And that is, the pinnacle of what a church does. Or at least that's the way I perceive the church has functioned over the last 100 years or 200 years, where there has been that central Sunday service. Obviously, there are things like denominations like SDAs who, meet on Saturday, but generally speaking, for most evangelical churches, there has been the Sunday service, and that has been the pinnacle of the Christian faith, so to speak. That got taken away from us. That got stripped away from us, and all of a sudden, churches had to try to work out what it meant to be the church, the ecclesia, without meeting in the same building once a week. Personally, I actually found it really exciting, a fantastic time. a time when actually we've had to be creative and we've had to do things differently. You know, in business, they often talk about disruptions and how a disruption will either allow a organization, say a business, to either evolve and be creative and do things in a new way, or they will try to continue to do what they were always doing and fail and often almost become, well, irrelevant and go bankrupt. So the great illustration, not that they went fully bankrupt, but became almost irrelevant, was Kodak. Kodak was this amazing company. It was the largest user of silver in the world. It was the biggest producer of film in the world, and everyone's had regular cameras that weren't digital. Then the digital revolution came and Kodak didn't keep up with this new technology. And all of a sudden, tens of thousands of people all around the world started buying digital and weren't getting their film developed anymore. And as a result, Kodak as a company started shrinking and shrinking. Kodak's still around today, but it's not the company it was once upon a time. Why? Because they couldn't evolve quick enough to jump on board with the digital revolution that was happening. And of course, they were actually at the forefront of all things to do with cameras, including digital, back right at the nucleus of when it all started. Disruptions come in and they change the game. In many ways, COVID-19 has been a disruption. It has changed the game. But what have we learned? You know, Mike Frost, he's a lecturer at Moreland College. He had on his Facebook page basically asking this question of, what has the church been doing during COVID-19? And he had this list. You can probably see it up on the screen now if I can work out the technology. But there was this list of different things. And there was, the church was able to do prayer walks, note to neighbours to see if people need help, footpath chalk messages of hope and support and encouragement, Facebook street groups where people would organise different, groups for their street and ask people to come on board, and we're able to write and continue communication to each other. When we look around the world, we see things like driveway concerts, and not just on driveways, but even like on the big unit complexes where you would see choirs of people almost, where there would be one person conducting and then whole wall of unit blocks with people singing songs. And some of those were done just by regular people in the community, and sometimes we actually saw that happening as churches. Balcony choirs, host a virtual dinner party. Often, people would do like Zoom, and they would have a meal, and everyone would have a meal and sit around and have a chat. Zoom, if you're not familiar, video conferencing application. There was one great thing, I think it was in Italy from memory, where one of the locals, he wasn't a church guy, I don't think, but I'm not sure if it was related to church, but just he put he used the side of a unit complex actually as the cinema screen, and so he projected this massive screen, massive image onto the wall and had the audio, and so all the people in the community were able to sit on their balconies and watch a movie together while being in isolation. We saw similar things for exercise classes, personal trainers standing on their balconies, personal trainers standing on the top of rooftops, doing all these different things, exercise programs, and people being able to jump in and do likewise. Begin a podcast to talk about feelings and thoughts and all of those sorts of ideas. Many, many different things. You might have seen in the suburban streets around bear hunts where people would put bears in their windows, and then families with their children could walk up and down the streets trying to find bears in the different windows, and of course, engage with the community that way. I know with a few of my friends, one of the nights I decided to do like a Zoom catch up over a trivia night. That worked really well. try and create support networks for people. That's one of the things that we tried to do here at Riverside, where we tried to get everyone in a small group, and those small groups then caught up with each other, if not every week, every fortnight. And, excuse me, tried to just touch base with people, pray with each other, but also see if there were any practical needs. And then practical helps. There has been the PACE Foundation. They've organised meals through the Kickstart Cafe, which is basically one of the major developers in the local area. And they've got a social enterprise cafe, and they've been giving something like 90 meals twice a week to different residents, or 90 families it might be, to different families around the local community, people who were needing a meal. These are practical helps. We've been able to help with that, been able to help get some families involved and get some meals to those people. And all these things have been wonderful and fantastic, and it has been great to see the church active in still trying to build community, even when we've not been able to be community, even when we've not been able to see people face to face, other than through it digitally. So how is the church then? There's been this sort of missional aspect of the church where individuals have been able to get out and the church has been able to help. And, we've been really blessed. We've been able to maintain the grocery store that we have, the food bank that we have here at church. And we've been able to have lots of people from the community, not all at the same time. We've had to have quite a strict rule on social distancing, but one at a time. People have been able to come in, do their shop, and then be able to head out. And then we've been able to have different spaces outside with distancing where people have been able to wait for their orders to be put together. So we as a church have been able to still be a blessing to our local community, which has been great. But then there is this idea of, well, how are we coming together to worship God? Don't get me wrong, I totally believe that mission and things like a grocery store, food bank grocery store is completely worship, but more in that sort of traditional sense of how we understand worship to exist. And when you have the Sunday service taken away, what does it mean? What does it mean to still be church? And without a doubt, probably the biggest thing has been utilising social media or digital media. So YouTube live, Facebook live streaming, Zoom, and I'm sure that there's probably heaps of other digital platforms that different churches have used. I was reading actually just this morning that approximately 9 in 10 churches are providing a version of an online service, with 18% of churches trying to recreate or mirror what they previously did in person, and about 74% of churches meeting online in a modified format. We're doing that. We're doing that when we connect with Carlingford Baptist Church on a Sunday morning, and that's been working really well. It's been great seeing everyone on Facebook and messaging each other as that goes live. Let me encourage us to continue that. But 9 in 10 churches have basically said, all right, let's just take what we do on a Sunday and then move it onto a digital platform. And that's been excellent on one hand, yet I don't know. There's a bit of me where I hope that that's not the only thing that we've learnt. I mean, there's been really great results. It's actually been amazing. Those churches, not all churches, but a lot of churches that have really embraced this digital format have actually seen some level of growth. So part of that same report that I was reading also said 9 in 10 churches who answered the survey identified they knew visitors were joining their online service or their online services. So 9 in 10 churches were actually seeing visitors turning up to watch their online services, which is excellent. And you hear stories of, there was one story in the Baptist Association here in Sydney where they're only small, But over the years, they've had plenty of people, it's particularly a Chinese, Mandarin or Cantonese, I can't remember which one, but it's not in English. But they've had plenty of people over the years come to their service, but then move back to mainland China. And this has actually given their opportunity for those people to reconnect. And so you have all these stories of churches that have now got this sort of global platform where people from literally all around the world are actually tuning in on a Sunday to watch their church services. It's an absolute blessing. We'll see if that lasts post-COVID-19. It may just be a thing that happens now. But actually, I'm sure for many people, maybe these churches will say, well, let's continue this online presence, and then people in, whether it be mainland China or somewhere else where it's actually hard for people to get to a church, will start to tune in and start to watch. I think that's a great blessing. Yet at the same time, those churches that maybe haven't been as proactive with doing online stuff or even just regular contact, whether it's being really proactive in making phone calls and touching base and having like a network of small groups that then go through and connect with each other. Those churches, I think in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, whenever we come back together and whenever we're allowed to come back together, I think some of those groups are really going to struggle. And I feel like some churches will come out the other side and have possibly shrunk, which I think would be really sad. But it'll be interesting to see how it all ends up. But at the end of the day, if the use of technology is the only thing that changes after COVID-19, I feel we will have missed a really big opportunity. I just feel like this disruption that has come into the church in this country, and indeed most countries, actually is a real blessing. That's whether it's 3 months or 6 months or however long it is in the life cycle of a church that could be 100 years old. This is just a little blimp on the radar, and actually that this gives us just this massive opportunity for rediscovering what it means to be the church. I believe, and I'm sure that this isn't just me, that most of us believe that the calling of the church can be seen in Matthew 28, which is, the Great Commission, where Jesus is about to ascend into heaven, and he then says to his disciples, well, this is the job that I'm giving you. And of course it says, go into all the world and make great church services. Probably not actually what it says in the Bible, but I kind of feel like at times that's how the church has actually understood that Bible passage, that the church reads, go into the world and make disciples, and somewhere because of culture or just historical setting or whatever it might be, that something switches in the brain, and instead of reading that as making disciples, we read that as go and make church services. And we read it as this idea that this is the ultimate goal of what it is that we're trying to do, that it's the ultimate goal of what Jesus has called us to do. And I'm not trying to say that a Sunday service isn't important. It is, but we have somehow translated this in our mind to say, what's important? Bums on seats on a Sunday. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey everything I have commanded you. This is our calling. This is our instruction. I can't help but feel like God has called us to a holiday house, to a beautiful holiday house by the beach. And there's some beautiful bushland that it backs onto, and it overlooks the beach, and it is just this wonderful holiday house. And for some reason, the church has said, okay, we've got to go to this holiday house, but we'll get our cars ready. And we could get to the holiday house in our Hyundai i30 or our Toyota Corolla, and it would get us there just fine. But instead of driving off to the holiday house, actually we've driven to the mechanics. And at the mechanics, we've then tried to take off some of the panels of our i30, and we've tried to put on new panel work that makes it look like a Ferrari. And then we've gone inside the car and we've taken out the seats and we've put in leather Ferrari seats. And then we've gone under the bonnet and we've taken out, the i30 1.8 or 2 litre engine or whatever it is, and we've put in like a 3.8 dual turbo, whatever fancy Ferrari engine. And we're trying to create a Ferrari so that we can then make our way on our journey to this destination. And of course, the destination is that of making disciples, and the car is how we get there. And how we get to this point of making disciples is that the church has just gone, or the ecclesia has said, all right, Sunday church services, that's how we do it. We're going to put all of our resources, all of our time, all of our finances, all of our blood, sweat, and tears is going to go into this one thing. And we're going to make it beautiful. We're going to make it fantastic. And everyone's going to want to get into our car. They don't want to go in a Hyundai i30. They want to go in the Ferrari so we can get to the holiday house. So we can get to the destination of making disciples. So the problem is, because we've put all our time and effort and focus into this one kind of car, into this Ferrari, actually we could have had a whole bunch of other ways of getting there. We could have had bikes or helicopters or whatever the illustration you want to, whatever mode of transport you want to place into this illustration. This idea that basically we've been so focused at this one method that we see the method now as the purpose and the point of what it is that we're doing. We're now focused in on the car, rather than saying actually it's about getting to that destination of making disciples. And if anything, actually what's happened is we've twisted it where we've actually said, if anything, disciple making is about building the church, rather than the church is a way to get to making disciples. And it's just one way. Yes, we are called to gather. Yes, we are called to bring glory to the Father in worship in our life, but also in our collected lives as we meet together. And I could get through like a whole talk on church history and what it looked like in the early church and all these sorts of ideas. But I can't help but think that we've kind of taken our eyes off the focus of what it is we're called to do. We're called to make disciples. And yes, church services are a part of that. But I think in so many churches, we've just focused in on this one aspect of making disciples. What will the church look like after COVID-19? God has called us to this holiday house, and we need to do that. But He has called us to make disciples. There is this duality there, isn't there, of making disciples in Matthew 28. Matthew 28 says, go, so as you go about life, but also this idea of what does disciple making look like? Well, Jesus gives two words to describe it. He says that you're to make disciples, to baptize, and to teach. Baptizing is an illustration of bringing people into the kingdom, and that baptism is an outward manifestation or an outward practice that we take hold of to symbolize that we are now followers of Jesus, that we have become Christians. And then teaching is this other idea of spiritual formation, that it's not just a chance to give information and knowledge acquisition. No, actually teaching for a disciple in Jesus' time was all about spiritual formation, and the devotional then works inwards for the formational. This is what it means to make a disciple. if we're talking about cars as illustrations, when you're a P-plater and your dad says, all right, this is your first car. Now you've got to take care of it. Make sure you clean it every week and make sure you get it serviced twice a year. What does it mean to take care of a car? If the act is taking care of a car, the illustrations and the practical ramifications of that is, well, clean it regularly, get it serviced regularly. These are the two outworkings of what it means to clean your cars. Similar, this is what Jesus is saying. Make disciples. What does that look like? Well, baptize, bring people into the kingdom, tell people about Jesus, be the light that shines into their life, but also teach them. Let them find teleos. Teleos is this Greek word about maturing as Christians, that we are to help people find teleos, that we move from being a child in the faith to a young adult in the faith into a parent. What is a parent? Well, a parent, by definition, they have to reproduce. They have to have the next generation. But what is the church going to look like after COVID-19? My hope is actually at the end of the day, that we will understand that we can be the church without coming together in the room on a Sunday morning or Sunday evening. That is a great blessing and that we can do that. But that when we are called to be the ecclesia, we are so much more than just an hour and a half on a Sunday. And that my hope is that yes, we can learn how to use technology and that's great. But my hope is that this disruption can come in and shake us out of this Sunday-centric mode and go, actually, there is so much more to the ecclesia than simply a Sunday. There is so much more that we can do in engaging with our fellow family, whether it be in small groups, whether it be catching up with each other, whether it be in the midst of mission. We need to be more than just a people who come together to sing a bunch of songs and to listen to a sermon and to spend a couple of minutes listening to someone pray and then go home after a cup of coffee. We have to be more than this. My prayer, my hope is that we will start to discover what that looks like over the next weeks and the next few months. That we will start to take a greater chance in what it means to be the ecclesia of God here in whichever suburb you find yourself in, whichever church group you find yourself in. Let's take some time out to reflect on what can it look like. Let's let our spiritual imaginations run wild. What does it mean to just put the Sunday service to one side for a moment and just try to work out what could it be to be church outside of that? We'll always come back to the Sunday. We know how to do that so well that once we're allowed to meet together on a Sunday, that'll just click straight back in. But my hope is that it's not going to take 95% of our focus, 95% of our energy and of our finances and of our resources and all of those sorts of things. That actually we'll see that as the opportunity to come together to celebrate what it is God has been calling us to do outside of Sunday. That'll be a chance for us as the ecclesia to celebrate what it means to be the gathered and the scattered church. That's my prayer for us as a faith community, but also for us as a wider church. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Talk to you soon.